Good morning. The mission of the Big Walnut Local Schools is to inspire and guide each student to his or her maximum potential. We will call the meeting to order with a moment of silence for personal reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Darren?
Mr. Crow?
Here.
Mrs. Dorsch?
Here.
Mr. Fuji?
Here.
Mrs. Nix?
Here.
Mrs. Graciosa?
Here.
I'll jump ahead to item number 6, selected board policies. It is recommended the board approve the untable the first reading of policy 8600, transportation.
So moved. Second.
Darren? Well, hold on a minute. Is there any discussion? Or you have to take the vote first, right? I'm a little slow this morning.
No. Fine. If the board would like to discuss a policy, now would be the appropriate opportunity before we vote.
I'll jump in there. Have your concerns been?
No.
No?
Well, the fact is that we had 2 copies, one that was on the October 4th
Correct.
agenda, and the second was on the October 20th. So the changes that were made were for what purpose?
I didn't get to the answer of that. I believe it be clerical.
Okay.
It was, the 8600 was not on the agenda, I don't believe, on the 4th. The one that made it on the agenda for the 20th
Right.
is the correct
Okay.
wording and verbiage.
Okay. So clerical error.
Somewhere in there.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other discussion or questions?
Yeah, so I'm confused. So the policy that was handed to us as a, when we came in by Mr. McLean is the one that we're going to say is the one that we would be acting on as a first reading? Not acting on, that we are talking about right now for a first reading. Is that correct?
Is that correct?
Versus the one that was emailed?
Correct. The one in the packet that was emailed on the 4th is not the one that was read on the 20th. Any more?
I want to, I have 2 policies sitting here. I have one that has the ABCD. You
Correct.
guys see that one?
No.
Okay, so ABCD, this section here, we are not looking at that policy.
That's the original email that came from the packet,
And then I have this policy.
which is the policy that was on the agenda and had first read at the meeting on the 20th.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I have a question or suggestion to know if I am in order. I would like to move to put this back, take this back off the table.
That's
Already,
the motion that we're working on right now. We will be voting on it momentarily.
Mr. Crow, may I jump in?
Yeah.
I think the clerical issue is, so the handout that we received from Neola was not tailored to Big Walnut. This is their boilerplate update for everyone. There were likely things that in the past we had already addressed in our policy. So that's why the 2 would not necessarily match, because in looking at this policy, the one that's on the computer, It appears it was updated in 2020,
2022.
2022. I can't tell when it was first adopted, but
2000.
my understanding is we would have likely had already made some of these choices. Therefore, we don't need to make the choices again because they've already been made. So that's why the paper from Neola and what was emailed to you do not match. Does that make sense? I'm guessing it does not. Neola gives us the handout.
Right.
That does not mean it's going to match what we have, because we may have made action 2 years ago based on a handout they gave us 2 years ago. Some districts might not have made those adjustments, so this would apply more to them. So that's why there was the discrepancy between the original handout and then what you saw that was emailed to you, because choices were already made prior to maybe many of us being on this board, or at least prior to my time here.
I see that if this doesn't work, what you're saying is we have a confusion over this policy, because what we may have gotten says 2009, and even on our, but this 2009 is different than this 2009, which is different policies, like you said. So,
Can you speak up?
this doesn't,
Yeah, I know, that's why I was asking to speak up. Thank you.
we have confusion over this policy. I move to,
The motion on the floor is to untable it. There's no other ability to make a motion at this point.
Right.
We have a motion and a second on the floor to adopt 8600 as a first reading.
Right.
If Mrs. Nix wishes to withdraw her motion to move this forward, then we need another motion to have a table. Because we can't, right now where we are is that we're either going to vote for or against the first reading of 8600 as it has been presented.
And we're in the discussion phase right now,
Right, so,
okay,
which I will add. I believe the confusion comes from the fact that when we met with Neola stated that things aren't omitted from a proposed policy, they're strucken out. And we came across a policy where items were removed, which went against what Neola had explained. I'm okay with the policy that we had the first reading on,
We didn't have a first reading on.
or,
No, we
excuse me,
tabled.
the policy we tabled at the last meeting.
Given the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, given the confusion, it sounds like the five of us might not all feel confident that we have read the appropriate version of this. So I think it seems like it would be most reasonable to leave this on the table so that we can all be confident that we have the correct version, that we've read the correct version, and know exactly what we're doing a first reading on before doing a first reading. Because I thought before this conversation and now I'm like, wait, I don't know which one I've read, so I would prefer to go back and make sure that I have the correct version. I have the ability to sit down and read the correct version, knowing that this is exactly what is going to be moving forward. It's just my perspective.
Can I speak to this,
Yeah.
please, Mr. President? Hearing Mr. McLean's explanation of the universal copy from Neola, it clears my confusion as to why there were two. So I guess the only question that it generates to me now is, does the Neola copy cover all of our needs for that particular issue? And you still have my copies. So,
I'll return it to you.
okay, that, I understand now why there's a difference. And I guess my question now, and this is directed to you, is the Neola copy complete and covering all of our needs based on that policy?
The one that's on the table.
The one that's on the table, the 8600.
I believe so.
Okay. Then I'm okay with it. I understand after all of the discussion why it's different.
For clarification on a very confusing subject, Sherry, on the only difference between 8600 that was in the packet provided on the 4th and the one that's laying on the table now is the ABC mileage section. Correct?
My take, the biggest issue or the biggest addition to this policy is that transportation can't be changed once the school year starts. So let's say we had a levy on the ballot on Tuesday and it failed. We couldn't cut transportation to state minimums at this time. We would have to wait until the next school year. So that's the biggest addition to this policy which is law, so we couldn't do it anyways. This is making us compliant with that.
Correct.
But in my opinion, that's the most significant part of this policy change.
But that's really kind of in paragraph 5, and the entire intent, so that everybody's looking at the same document, is that we would be able to have those questions answered if we had issue with them or had something that we were unsure about. We could do that as part of the first reading. We still don't necessarily have understanding of exactly what documents in front of us.
And that's correct. You're not adopting the policy. All we're doing is recognizing this as a first reading, and we have a motion and a second on the floor. So what's the pleasure of the board, Mr. President?
Go ahead and take the vote.
Okay. Mr. Crowell,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorsch,
No.
Mr. Fuji,
No.
Mrs. Nix,
Yes.
Mrs. Graciosi.
Yes.
Item 6.2, it is recommended the board approve the first reading of policy 8600 transportation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Having no discussion, I will make the statement that this will give time for everybody to get up to speed before the second reading.
If
If
changes are required, then it goes back to a first reading.
it goes back in the basket, yes.
Mr. Crowell,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorsch,
No.
Mr. Fuji,
No.
Mrs. Nix,
Yes.
Mrs. Graciosi.
Yes.
Item 6.3, policy discussion on 1617, 2280, 3217, 4217, 5111, 5223, 5460.01, 6700, 7217, 7440, 7440.03, 8210, 8330. This is not considered the second read of those policies. They needed to be maintained on the agenda purely because our bylaws require it.
At any point, are we going to have a conversation about the process, or if our process is being amended at all because of the approval of the Neola contract, or what is our approach going forward?
Part of the resistance to some of these policies at the last meeting were, I won't speak for other members, but that people didn't have access to them. So, this, as long as I'm running the meetings and helping set the agendas, we're going to have what I'm calling PRD, prior to first read. PRD being presentation, review, and discussion, so that all board members, so we don't end up with the confusion we've got with 8600 for one, where the policies are presented, but that's not considered the first read. If everybody's okay with that.
Would part of that process be that, so that would be earlier in the agenda, if everyone is okay with even say a subset of those, then in that same meeting, could they go to a first reading, or what's your thought process on that, or would it go to the next meeting?
They could if everybody's okay with that. Knowing that some of these policies that we're going to be going through have mundane changes that everybody agrees with. If there's resistance, that gives this board the opportunity to move it to the first read at the subsequent meeting without action. Does that make sense? So with 6.3 with no action on it, we will move to 7.
Can we have discussion about any of these policies?
Yeah,
I'm just like that.
no, that's fine.
Okay. After reviewing the preschool program policy again, well, last time we brought it to the meeting, I did have some questions about it. I found it a little bit confusing, and I just wanted to bring those points out. I know when I looked at it, it's quite different than our existing preschool policy. That part wasn't necessarily surprising. But as I went through, one of the things that was a little bit confusing to me is in the third paragraph where we're listing out the Board of Education may operate general education classrooms, integrated classrooms, and or special education classrooms to meet the needs of students served. Definitions for each type of classroom are as follows, and then we have A, B, and C. That are the definitions of those 3 types of classrooms, but then A and C are stricken, which I found confusing because I thought those were just definitions, so I wasn't sure why those definitions of the general education classroom and special education classroom were stricken. And then we go through the transportation piece. I didn't know if that was actually in line with our existing policy, so I thought we needed to perhaps look back at that. And then it looked like this policy from Neola came with quite a few administrative guidelines, but we didn't have any administrative guidelines along with this policy at the first reading. At least I didn't believe we did. So I wasn't quite sure if that meant something was missing, or if because there's no administrative guidelines that we're using with this policy, then the preschool program would fall under basically all of the other policies, if that was assumed, or how exactly that worked.
Mr. McLean, can you speak a little bit to paragraph B and what's there under policy 2280 for the preschool program?
Yeah, I'm not sure why A and C are stricken out.
But as it relates to the new definition of integrated classrooms, more than 50% of students in the class.
Yeah, so these are the ratios that we have to abide by. You can't not follow these. So no more than 50% of the students in the preschool classroom are students with disabilities. So you could have less. You could have, I believe, 16 kids in a classroom, and you could have 6 with disabilities and 10 typical peers that are non-disabled. But the max you could be would be 8 and 8. If you were to get a 9th student, or one of those typical peers was to be identified as a student with a disability, you would have to have an additional classroom. So we've got multiple classrooms in our ELC for that, so we're not right up at the caps, but that is something we are required to follow.
Thank you.
And if it's the case that in this district we have integrated classrooms, I guess I don't understand why we still wouldn't have the other 2 listed there, because those are simply definitions.
So my wonder on that topic is, if you look on page 2 where it talks about the transportation and refers back to the definition, it would be my understanding that that's why this policy was necessary and the definition changed in paragraph B. So looking at, I don't know if it has a number next to it or not, under transportation, the first bullet under transportation referring back to the transportation, and here's where the definition of preschool students resides. So my assumption while reading this document is that the paragraph change in B to which you're referring comes back to that transportation subparagraph or statement. I don't know if that addresses your concern or if I confused it, but that's how I read this. And I'm wondering, actually I'll wait.
Which subparagraph under?
The first bullet under transportation. Transportation shall
Okay, shall
or
or
shall not. So part of this goes back to 8600, and then the conversation of transportation shall be provided to disabled students as required by law, coming back to the integrated classroom conversation and definition of disabled students.
Mm-hmm.
And this policy as is going to need to be changed because so districts are required to transport preschool students with special needs. School districts are not required to transport the typical peers. You can if you want to. We do at Big Walnut. We currently transport both. We currently transport all preschool students. Now, some parents opt to transport them themselves, but we do offer transportation. By selecting shall not, then that is
That literally means shall not. It's not a may not or does not have to.
The-
And therefore, our current actions would be out of policy.
if we are selecting that policy, then that would mean our intent is to no longer transport all preschool students. Going back to 8600, we could not make that change mid-year. But if that's not the board's intent, then that should be changed to shall. If the plan is to continue transporting all preschool students in the 23-24 school year, then the selection should be shall and not shall not.
So that, I think, brings the question back to the ad hoc committee that made that selection and placed it on here. Was that the intent of the ad hoc committee, to change our practice in terms of what we're doing with typical and disabled students in our preschool?
Me and Mr. McLean had some discussions. This is the policy that you had to get clarification from Neola
And
on.
that was the clarification I got yesterday, was you should not have a policy that doesn't reflect what you're planning on doing. So if you're planning on making that change, then it should be shall not. If you're not planning on making that change, then it should reflect what you're doing. So
But I believe the question was, we could mark it one way and make a decision case by case, and you found out
they did not recommend doing that. So going above what we had originally discussed, going above and beyond, if our policy says shall not, can we still transport them anyways? Right. Yeah, but she said that just doesn't make sense. If that's not your practice, your policy should follow your practice.
Ad hoc committee will get with Mr. McLean and make corrections to that policy.
Can I ask another question
Yeah.
about that transportation piece of it? And I don't know if this is reading too much into this. Maybe this doesn't matter at all. But is there a difference, and maybe there's not a difference policy-wise, maybe it's just in practice, is there a difference in indicating whether we will provide transportation for preschool students, meaning our buses, or or if we, get a third party to get preschool students to school. Do we need to differentiate between that at all, or?
I don't know that we need to differentiate. I believe, and I would have to check with Tim in transportation, but I believe our buses transport our preschool students to our preschool.
But I think Sherry not speaking for you, I think she's asking if there's an option that we could use a third party. Is that
Basically, if we're saying transportation shall be provided, we can do it either way, or is there in some policy, do we need to differentiate between our buses are getting these children to school versus we will provide transportation, whether that's our buses or a third party?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the answer to that. In dealing with third party companies this year, they are dealing with a shortage just as everyone else. So those third party options aren't good options right now.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question for Mr. McLean. Is there a law that mandates we transport special needs children?
If it's part of their IEP in which the IEP team determines transportation is a required service, then yes, but that would be on a case-by-case basis.
And that would be regardless of compulsory age, so it would
Correct.
include the preschool.
Correct, but not all students are going to. So again, preschool being the exception, because you're required to transport
Correct.
preschool students with a disability, regardless of the disability. If it's speech, we're required to transport. When they get to kindergarten, that would not necessarily
Rules change.
be the case. Special transportation for a student with a speech need probably is not going to require special transportation.
See, that background that you have in transportation and special ed. from
And
last
special
year's-
education.
Well, I do want to come back to a comment you made, Mr. McLean. Mr. McLean, you said something to the effect of policy should reflect what the district is actually doing or intends to do, was the feedback you received yesterday. Is that accurate?
Correct.
So if that's the case, then I also think that a conversation needs to be held around our weapons policies that are currently in front of us, as we want to talk about intention of the ad hoc committee and placing it here. I think that will go a long way in dispelling any kind of concerns or rumors that might be floating from the idea of what is intended with this. Is this an appropriate place to ask that conversation? Actually, you know what? I should back up. Mrs. Dorsch, did you have the question answered that you wanted on policy 2280 with reference to revised preschool programming? I don't mean to.
Yeah,
jump
no,
ahead.
I mean, I definitely think there's some questions about that one that we need to get a few things addressed. But yeah, I think I got the info that I needed out of.
So between now and next week, when there would technically be a second reading, you feel confident that you could do that?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead on something. I was really just trying to pick up off of the comment he was making in addressing the question on how the policy should reflect what we're actually doing or intend to do. I quickly jotted that down, Ryan, as you were saying it, because it comes back then to what is the intent of some of these other policies that might be here. And I think there is a great deal of wonder out there in our community as well as in our district in reference to the intentions behind 1617 and the associated changes with the other policies.
Once the policies are set, they're public knowledge. However, we do not discuss safety and security measures in public session.
Sure.
If you would like to take that up with the full board in our exec today with those discussions or with those questions. I know that doesn't do anything to calm the public. I spent 2 hours calming the public or the employees last night.
And maybe it's not about calming the public then,
Well,
Mr. President. Maybe the conversation is more about the strategy the ad hoc committee is taking now prior to the second reading to make sure that concerns are being heard and addressed.
Well, like I said, we had a meeting last night with the forum with the employees. Uh, I had full intentions on having discussions in exec on those 4 with full board, and we're going to have a town hall Saturday at the high school in the auditorium from 9 to 12. The whole community, all stakeholders are welcome. They can ask questions. We'll give answers if we can. And there's a survey. The survey won't go online until after the public meeting. Does that answer your questions?
Yes. I
Can
thought
I
it
s-
was an opportunity to maybe at least clarify for the community what steps have been taken and what steps are
Well,
going to be taken.
We're taking the steps. There's many layers to security at Big Walnut already. And some I know, some I don't, being the president of the board even. Part of your security is the silence and the unknowing by the public of all measures. So there is some secrecy to events. What can be made public will be made public if it doesn't interfere with the purpose of the security measure.
Can I ask a quick question then? In regard to these forums, the one you had yesterday afternoon with the staff and the one Saturday with the public, since you stated, and I mean, this has pretty much always been the practice, you know, not to get too deep into safety and security for understandable reasons. When individuals have questions, I guess I don't know how much comfort they can get in responses or perhaps lack of responses because of the desire to keep some of that more confidential, kind of on the down low.
I don't look at it as a desire as much as a
A
necessity.
need, right. I mean, the way I look at it, there is, I think a lot of people are uncomfortable because there hasn't been a lot of communication, and I think some of it is not even necessarily about what exactly we intend to do with specific policies or what things we have in place, is to what are we looking at on a regular basis? Who are we collaborating with on a regular basis to ensure the safety of our schools? How frequently are we revisiting the procedures and policies that we have in place? I think there's a lot of background that we could provide to the community that would help people see kind of the approach that has been taken historically, give some insight into the priority that is put on this, and then ensuring that we are getting stakeholders' feedback and input on the measures that are taken. I think if there's those types of things that we could potentially talk about and provide the community some background on, that might go a long way to helping alleviate some concerns.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
I'd like to just give a history on the policies thus far, just to, everyone can listen, get a little educated. So Neola sends packets of proposed updates. Can you hear me?
No. Thank you.
Neola sends packets of proposed updates twice a year, in January, February, approximately, and in August. The Neola policies we are reviewing, and this is from the meeting we had last night, we reviewed with the administration, Neola, and the ad hoc committee in the end of September. The full packet of these policies were provided to the full board October 4th, 2022. There were 22 policies in this packet. The board had a discussion of policies on the eve of 10/4/22. Then we were bringing them to 14 of the 22 policies as a first reading on 11/20. Since then, many emails have come to the board concerning weapons policies. So the ad hoc committee determined we'd have a meeting of stakeholders and community members would be beneficial to acquire prior to the second reading or approval of these policies. Working with the administration, we scheduled this forum, along with a single agenda, that's today, for the meeting and a town hall to take place on Saturday, 9 to 12, along with providing a survey and room for concerns. So currently, now, as we stand, we have 3 weapons policies, 3217, 4217, 7217. Some of those discuss staff, property, and Steve, if you have the 32.
One is for professional staff, one is for professional staff, one is for classified staff. And those are existing currently.
Those are the existing policies. So then we have 1617 would be
Designated as new.
designated as new, and that's stemming from the court's decision of Gabbard versus Madison School District and the subsequent actions that ensued since the passage of Senate Bill 317 and House Bill 99. Now we are faced with the revisions and adoptions of our policies provided to us by Neola, stemming from how those changes in the statute of the Ohio law affects our board policies. So currently, we have a new policy. All these we have 1617 would be new, but we have the ones existing, and those would be revisions. In the 1617 policy, the Board of Education prohibits, and this is how it read in all the other policies, but you can correct me, Steve, I have this one here. The Board of Education prohibits staff members from possessing, storing, making, or using weapons, including a concealed weapon, in a school safety zone in any setting that is under the control of the supervision of the board for the purpose of school activities, approved or authorized by the board, including but not limited to property leased, owned, contracted by a board. Then it goes on to say the term of weapons include any object in the manner in which it is used is intended to be used or is presented is capable of inflicting serious body harm. Weapons include but are not limited to, and it talks, firearms, guns, on and on, right? Razors, knives. So be advised, this could also include tactical keychains, mace, monkey balls, Buddha beads. So anything that you're carrying on your personal property, this is my interpretation, for protection, be it walking away from your school bus at night to your car, walking away from a sporting event, anything on your personal property can be construed as a weapon. That's what we're looking at, and it is not easy to decipher this, and we do not go about this lightly. I don't think anybody does. As a professional aviator my whole life, it has been about safety, and many aviators, many commercial pilots may also be carrying other devices to provide protection for themselves. As an aviator, it doesn't take away from the job you're doing. It's there because you've been trained, you were approved by the FAA, the next level. It's not someone just gifting you this. So I consider it, if I send my daughter somewhere with mace or a tactical keychain and she's walking around on school property or a billy club, how is that perceived? It's perceived as a weapon. So that's some things we have to talk about.
To answer your question, Sherry, on the issue of information to the public, the ad hoc committee will sit down with Mr. Ryan and Megan, and we'll put together some form of announcement, what we can talk about, what we can't, as far as security measures. I don't think it'll quell anybody as far as questions they have. It might. It's worth doing if it will settle some of them down, but there's a matter of trust here that don't believe is going to be changed by that. You good with that, Mr. Ryan?
I do have a comment. I don't think there's anybody in this room or in the schools that is not thinking of the children's and staff safety first. And whatever it takes to keep them safe is what the board and the ad hoc committee have worked on. And the importance of those particular pieces of information that keep the students and staff protected may require some confidentiality. And I think it's very important for the community to understand you would not give your house key to the criminal so they can come in and steal everything out of your house. The same with safety in these schools. We cannot give the information that we are going to see put in place that is going to keep the students, the staff, the custodians, the cafeteria workers, and our bus drivers safe. And I think that's important.
I would agree that I think safety and keeping our staff and students safe is critical. It's part of our job. I think coming back to your comment about trust, I think that the community and the staff have shown that there is a lack of trust right now with giving this board the authority to arm teachers with weapons, whether that's, bats or guns.
Well, there's a problem, the bats or the guns. The policies were written, the titles are weapons.
Sure.
Okay, and everything in the world is considered a weapon.
Sure, I understand that. But the problem with that is that if we put this policy in place, we do have the ability to put guns into the hands of our teachers. Now, maybe we don't actually intend to do that, but this policy outlives our tenure here on this board. So the five of us could decide, you know what, we don't want to do that. We want our teachers to have mace or, something, have tasers. But, I could drop dead next week and somebody could replace me on this board, and that could shift the whole dynamic. Or next year when there's elections, different people join this board, and then the ability to put guns in the hands of teachers or staff is there. And I think that is where the community really is hesitant, because they're not comfortable with our stance first, and then I don't think they're comfortable with this policy being out there, and who knows when somebody's going to take action with weapons that are lethal. Like I said, I do think it is part of our responsibility. It's part of our duty to keep our staff and, everyone, all of our students safe in our buildings. I think that the best way we do that is by letting our staff and our teachers focus on educating our students, taking care of our students, what they focus on in life, what they went to school for, their profession, and rely on our law enforcement security professionals to focus on their expertise of safety and security. And if that means that we need to work on educating the public and bringing to our community information about what kind of funding levels are necessary to put an SRO in each building, I think we have a duty to go through that exercise first. And if at that point in time our community tells us, you know what, we don't want to give you more money so that you can have an SRO in each building, then we can come back and look at a policy like this to use other measures. But I think we have a responsibility to go to the community with that. Personally, I believe that while I can, I understand both your and Angela's points that, some of the language in this isn't ideal because it's weapons, and that includes any number of things. regardless, I do think that introducing weapons into the classroom environment creates opportunities for those weapons to be used against our staff and students as well. I think it makes the environment just inherently more dangerous because there are weapons available in classrooms. Obviously, we'd have to put loads of policies, procedures, administrative guidelines in place if anything like this were to be enacted. But those measures aren't completely foolproof. There's been, any number of stories out there about incidents happening with weapons in the school. And honestly, I'm a big believer in the best way to prevent a tragedy like a mass shooting is really being proactive rather than reactive. I think, America has kind of focused on keeping these monsters or, keeping these monsters out and looking at people who perpetrate these kinds of acts as outsiders. And the problem is studies show that they're not outsiders. They're typically insiders. And so, to me, I think the insiders who are suffering from mental health issues, who are just hurt or are hurting, it's individuals who are struggling. I think the best way to prevent those troubled individuals from perpetrating some kind of attack is really to be adequately staffed. It's having mental health resources available in our schools or resources that we can provide students or parents for their children if it's a child who's having issues. It's training our staff to recognize trauma. It's teaching our students coping skills and empathy. And honestly, it's by creating a culture where every student in our district feels like they have an adult in the district that cares about them, that they have someone that they can talk to, and that we have staff and teachers and an admin team that understand when concerns or fears need to be escalated. We need to have procedures in place to do that effectively. We need a culture where those concerns and escalation don't result in punitive measures against those kids, but instead with resources and with care. We need to build systems to take care of young people. Preventing self-harm, suicide prevention, and all of these types of care, at the end of the day, prevent school shootings. And I think our district is much better served by focusing on those types of programs and continuing to work with our law enforcement professionals here. We partner with both the Delaware County Sheriff's Department and the local Sunbury Police Department, working with both of them, educating our community on the funding resources that it takes to put SROs in all of our buildings. And then if we do all of that and this community still feels like there is a safety issue here, then at that point we come back and look at a policy like this. But I don't think that we can go there yet.
The misconception here, as I continually explain, these 4 policies that are on for us to look at do not put and cannot put currently guns in the schools.
Correct.
They can't.
Right, but they give us the authority to take additional actions.
They don't give
to
us
do
that
so.
authority. The authority was given to us by the General Assembly. We are charged as school board members to make a decision. It can be a easy decision to ignore, or it can be the hard decision to have these conversations and come up with a solution.
Absolutely.
Neola do not send out policies on whims. They have lawyers that go and compare case law and passed bills and signed ORC laws, and then they generate a policy to accommodate that. That's what we have in 1617. Neola didn't send it because they just wanted to send something out. They see that this board is responsible and we need to take action on what they send us.
Exactly, but we don't have to put this policy in place. Neola provides.
Why would they send it?
They send all kinds of policies that we don't put in place. This isn't the only policy that we've received from Neola that we haven't put in place. Doug, I do understand your point. I understand that this policy alone does not put guns in the hands of our teachers. I understand that. However, it gives this board, or this policy allows this board to take further action to do just that. Now, like I said, we may not have the desire to do that. Nobody knows. I don't even know what everybody on this board is thinking about this or is really intending to do with that. However, I think it's disingenuous to say that the public is blowing this out of proportion or anything, because this is the logical first step in doing that. And because our community members don't know what we're thinking, don't understand what we all have in place, and don't understand what our intention is with this, of course people are concerned. Of course people are worried. And I think they have every right to be. I mean, at what point is it okay for people to express concern if it's not okay for them to express concern right now? I mean, if everyone was like, well, okay, they may not be actually doing this, let's just let this go. At that point, it could be too late to express concern. I mean, it would either fall on deaf ears, or by that time, something's already enacted.
And this is a perfect opportunity. First off, going back to your first statement, please don't die between now and the next board meeting or those types of things. I would understand it if you won the $1 billion in the Powerball lottery, that you may not come. So
I'm an accountant, so I don't play the lottery.
Let's use that. I'm an accountant, so I don't play well played. Touche. I think, though, that Doug, I want to come back to that statement you just made in reference to the misperceptions that you're combating or that you're dealing with from the public. I think this is the perfect opportunity to address those misconceptions. Specifically, if you, as you, part of the ad hoc committee to place this policy on the agenda, you said the misconception here is that approval of this policy does not place weapons in the hands of our staff. I recognize that. I recognize the first paragraph of this new policy in 1617, but I also recognize that what Mrs. Dorsch is saying is that option C is the option selected by all the options provided. And here is where, Mr. McLean, if you had a conversation with Neola yesterday, I believe that you shared with us previously that Mrs. Collette works with 29 districts who, like us, have received these kinds of policy updates and such. As you were talking with her, are other boards of education across those 29 districts struggling with this issue or discussing this issue?
And I shared this with Doug and Angela last night. Of the 29 that Janice works with, we are the only one doing a first reading on 1617.
So my point, and I didn't know that. So my point there is there's also a timeliness to the conversation that's coming up. I recognize that you specifically, Mr. President, are dealing with the misconception here that approval of this policy does not inherently place weapons in the hands of students or staff. But the conversation of the option selected, as Mrs. Dorsch is alluding to, option C was the one selected by the ad hoc. So I think this is the opportunity to address any misconceptions that might be out there.
Misconception of what?
That's the quote that you just said. There is I'm fighting. There is a
Well,
misconception here that this policy is approved, or that approval of this policy does not place weapons in the hands of staff. So I think this is an opportunity to address.
Well, we
those
need to distinguish the difference between weapons, which can be defensive weapons, and guns.
And so it's your intent through this policy to really distinguish those
I
definitions.
can't. The policy we have to look at is as written.
Right.
It is a very poorly written policy.
Then,
As a matter of fact, HB 99, to some extent, is very poorly written too. The policy from Neola encompasses anything that can do bodily harm as a weapon. That isn't state law. The ORC designates how you use whatever that weapon is, whether it's a assaultable. You can't be charged if you're walking around. Well, nowadays you can't be charged if you're walking around with a gun, but you can't be charged if you're walking around with a pocket knife in your pocket. The policy, any of these policies, A or B choice, if you walk on to school property with a weapon, a pocket knife, you can be charged because it's going to the weapon and not how the object's being utilized. So it's very poorly written to start with. Can't change the verbiage in the policies. I suppose we could be like 28 other school districts whose boards aren't doing their job because they're ignoring the situation because it's a tough conversation to have. Big Walnut's kind of unique. We have tough conversations. That's what makes us good. But the misconception statement stems from the fact that initially, I believe the day on the 20th, the email started with they're going to arm our teachers. They're going to put guns in the schools. And to me, that is a misconception of the policies. We can't, as a school board, even if we adopt these policies, arm with guns teachers, because those under the HB 99, they have to be certified. They have to be qualified. Okay? We don't do that. A new, for lack of a better word, bureaucracy at the state level, the Ohio
School Safety and Crisis Center,
Exactly.
OSSCC.
They issue the permits, and they haven't issued the first permit in the state of Ohio.
So again, coming back to that misperception, the conversation that you're wanting to have with regards to this policy is the definition conversation. The conversation of not only the intent of an item, but how that item is defined and used within the confines of our school as it clarifies in this policy. Is that right?
Yeah, I would rather that the policy be written a little bit less wordy and more to the point. Generally speaking, well, I'll give you an example in the research. Most people don't know, and I'm sure there's a reason they don't know, is because it's not important to them. But I came across an article from 2013, and in 2013, there were over 200 school districts in Ohio that did arm their staff. It was legal before Gabber versus Madison. Gabber versus Madison's 2018 is when it was started. So it's fairly new as far as case law. But so if you take 2013 to 2018, 5 years, I don't recall hearing any accidental discharge or guns being left in the restrooms in Ohio. In other words, I don't perceive the issue of guns in school to be that negative. Do I want it? Not necessarily. But then again, I would like to go back to the days when I graduated school, when the pickup showed up and the guns were in the gun rack, and times change. You have to adapt to that change. And if you don't adapt, whether we're too fast, too slow, but if you don't adapt, you're not doing your job. Now, I believe we have a meeting scheduled with Neola on the 29th. So we'll have that conversation and attempt to get clarification on the definitions and see if that can be reworded by them, not us, because we can't. I also plan to have conversations after the first of the year or sooner with our senator and our state rep on things that can be done on that level, because we're working down here.
I get that,
But for today, we're faced with these four, and option C is the only one that places the control of what happens at what level with this board.
yeah, and Doug, I don't want there to be a misperception between you and I. I think that the conversation you just had, the discussion, actually dialogue that you just provided, gives more context than has been provided yet to date for the community. So if there are misperceptions based on the intent of the ad hoc or the conversation this board is having, you just addressed many of those. So that's the opportunity that I think was necessary to provide. And I would commend the fact that you met with the staff yesterday. 40 folks from the staff came in, is that right?
44.
So roughly 40, and then members of the community this coming weekend, and then the opportunity to engage them in a survey also is important. But to be able to hear from you the conversation, at least in this moment, of what the intention is important. And I think that goes a long way, and I appreciate the fact that you had that conversation. That doesn't need to be had secretly. That doesn't need to be had behind closed doors. That can be what the intent of the board is in taking action on 1617, or why the ad hoc committee brought 1617 forward. Thank you.
Although within that dialogue I just had, if you listened real good, you probably caught part of it
Well,
that I
here's
would
the
have rather
joy.
had in.
Here's the joy. I'll get the opportunity to go back and listen to this numerous times as members of the community will send us time-stamped moments. To go
I'm
back
sure
to.
they will.
So I'll have that chance.
Right.
Mr. President,
Yes.
board members, community, Mr. McLean, my business that I've been in over 25 years is commercial aviation. We read policies, we have rules that adhere to the sky. When accidents happen, we review. We come up with more policies. I believe because of this mass accidents that are happening in the schools, we have to continually revisit these policies, Now we have House Bill 99 that has put the authority, should we choose to take it, with the school board. These are very difficult discussions to have, and I'm willing to have these discussions with everybody, with all my board members, with the community. We want to be open. We have to look at the seriousness. I believe everything Sherry said. We have counselors. We need to address our students. We need to have an insurance policy that's going to keep our students, our staff safe, and we need to have the difficult discussions together professionally. So I want to thank everyone for talking about it, and it's not easy. It's definitely not an easy situation.
Can I make a quick comment, Doug, about what a couple of the things that you pointed out? You talked about the language of this policy not being great. I don't remember your specific words. I'm sure, like Steve said, somebody will come back and say what specific words were said.
Someone, I apologize, forgot to put their phone on.
Quite all right. So if the language in this policy is not good right now, we know that Neola updates policy frequently. We know that this legislation is relatively new. I think, one of the other options is waiting until additional changes are made, language is improved. So that's always an option. I would also point out that, I don't think not approving this policy is us not doing our jobs. I think that members of this board have continually shown that we are open to and prepared to have difficult conversations and make difficult decisions. No, very few of the decisions we make are easy ones. Over the last handful of years, we've made tons of really difficult decisions. And, most of those decisions were situations in, regardless of what choice we made, people were going to be upset. We've been dealing with that Steve and I think both of us, I shouldn't speak for Steve, but I will say that our tenure has been nothing but difficult conversations, starting right before the pandemic. It's been interesting. So I don't think, we're saying that we don't want to do our jobs, but like I pointed out, there are, and I believe you pointed out as well, and maybe Angela, that there are many layers to security and safety. I think there are a lot of things this district can do to ensure that our staff and students are safe. I think, a lot of research and studies have shown that more weapons in school do not create more safety. They create more opportunities for bad actors to get their hands on weapons. So I think there's, a lot to making sure that our students are happy and healthy and feel welcome and all of those things. And like we discussed, SROs in the buildings. You also mentioned intent in weapons, like, for example, a pocket knife. I get your point, I do, but you could say that a small child's intent when they bring a gun into the school that they took from their parents' bedroom or whatever is to show their friends. But that doesn't mean that it's a good idea. It doesn't mean that that is safe, because that provides an opportunity for somebody else to get their hands on that gun, and just accidents can happen. That same thing can happen with a pocket knife. Somebody who is a bad actor could get their hands on that, and the intent wasn't for that to happen, but it creates more opportunities for incidents to happen. So I think we need to show, and I think we are showing to our community that we are concerned about safety and security, and we take it very seriously. And we are looking at all of the options available. But I don't think that means we should accept a badly worded policy at this point in time. And I think we really need to investigate other options, talk to the law enforcement agencies that we collaborate with on a regular basis, get their feedback, listen to them, and go on from there to put best practices in place. That's all I got.
Moving on. Item 7.
Oh, I'm sorry, I still have one more policy I'd like to discuss. Ms. McLean, I do have a question from policy 5223, release time for religious instruction. I am curious. Sorry. I do have a question regarding policy 5223, release time for religious instruction relative to current existing policy. How does this differ from our policy for flexible credit options for students?
Could you refer me to the policy of flexible credit?
I actually can. It's 5460.03 flexible credit. And as we already have that policy in place, I guess my question is a little bit more specific, Ryan. Since we already have 5460.03 flexible credit in place, which is in accordance with Senate Bill 311, my question is, how does this policy inform or get modified by the flexible credit policy that we already have? And if you don't know the answer now, that's fine. I'm just curious about it, and if you could tell me later, that would be all right.
Yeah, I do not know the answer to that, and just if I'm going off the cuff, when we talk about credits, we're talking more secondary, and I believe this is going to be at least starting out at the elementary level. So that would be my guess.
I think that, thank you. That was my last question.
I had a quick comment about this. Sorry, I know you're probably excited to hear that. I had a couple of comments about this policy as well. I wasn't sure if we had gotten much feedback or any feedback from our staff or admin team on this policy. I know that this cannot take away from core curriculum, but I know this would impact special, so that's our art and music and PE. Is that correct?
The way we, in communicating with the folks from LifeWise, the way we would set this up would be, it would be at the very beginning of the day. So literally as the kids got off the bus, they would be getting on a LifeWise bus so that they're not missing the specials classes, because that's that's one of the main reasons some kids come to school. So to take that away, I don't think is very enticing for anyone. So that's not something that we were willing to do. So the beginning of the day when the kids are getting breakfast, maybe the first few minutes of morning meeting, which again, not ideal, but I don't think falls under the core instruction. But we were not willing to compromise on sacrificing art, music, PE, or anything like that for this.
Yeah, that was part of my comments. I mean, I think those are all really important to education and mental and social development, and all, help with cognitive function as well. So I guess, a lot of the people who came and spoke at our meeting who were really wanting this policy to be put in place so that LifeWise could come here, were really focusing on character education, which I think is great. I've always been, I think, the one who's kind of used my soapbox to talk about social emotional learning and how important that is to our students. Like I mentioned it with the weapons policy, learning coping skills and learning empathy, all of that stuff is really important. So I think it's great that people really want that for their kids. I think even like you mentioned in the, missing kind of the morning meeting, or like that circle time, as it was always kind of talked about, that was one of the main points in the day where some of that character education happens in the classroom. That's where a lot of the conversations about, how we treat each other at school each day, how, all of that kind of stuff happens. So I guess it's unfortunate that those students would miss that in their classroom as well. I just, I guess my biggest concern with this policy is just any kind of distraction that happens. Our days are already really, really tight. It's hard to kind of get everything in. And I know our staff, especially now with very limited subs, is stretched really, really thin. So my biggest concern is how this would impact just kind of the day-to-day operations and ensuring that our students are getting that ability to really bond with their classmates and their teachers.
And Mr. McLean, just because we spoke about transportation earlier and you just referenced a LifeWise bus because they came in and presented, that is not a Big Walnut Local School District bus.
That is correct.
So those policies aren't something that we're necessarily undertaking at this time. This is just a conversation to allow that to happen as excused absence.
Correct. And I guess the best analogy I could give would be similar to a student being picked up by a parent or anyone that's on their emergency medical card, a neighbor, an aunt or an uncle. In essence, the family is giving LifeWise permission to take their child out of school and return them.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that with the transportation discussion earlier, that was clear.
So this makes us not liable for any of that. But are we do we have any, we don't have any responsibility to vet LifeWise or their transportation that they're using or anything like that. So we are relying on parents to do their own vetting and make sure that the transportation in place is safe and
Nor are we endorsing their curriculum per se.
right.
That's correct.
Before we move on to item number 7, we're going to take a 3-minute recess. At this time, we're going to modify the order on the agenda and move item 10 ahead of item 7. It is recommended the board enter executive session to discuss details relative to the security arrangements and emergency response protocols for the Board of Education and consider confidential information related to the marketing plan, specific business strategy, production techniques, trade secrets, or personal financial statements of an applicant for economic development assistance, or to negotiate with other political subdivisions respecting requests for economic development assistance under the Ohio Revised Code 121.22 under Section G, I believe it's 6. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Darren?
Mr. Proud,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorsch,
Yes.
Mr. Fuji,
Yes.
Mrs. Nix.
Yes.
Mrs. Gracios.
Yes.
We're going to go into executive session. We have people waiting for us that have waited for the last 20 minutes or so. We will be coming back into regular session. I don't know what time. And we are out of executive session at 10:25. Item 7. Did you catch the 10:25?
That's exactly what I'm
Okay.
reporting now.
Item number 7. Board members' items of interests. We'll start to the left today.
I would like to wish our Big Walnut Eagle football team a great game tomorrow evening, and hope that they bring it home.
Jerry?
Thank you. So I just wanted to point out, Mr. Lynn Scott shared with us that it is National School Psychology Week. So big thank you to all of our wonderful school psychologists. They do very important work, and we really appreciate all that they do in our district. So big thank you to them.
Angela?
I'd like to thank all the staff that came out yesterday to voice their opinions, and I hope that we can continue to have more, be it ad hoc or communications with our staff. I think it's very important and beneficial. Also, I'd like to thank the staff for the communications that we do have on tough topics and the respect that I have from our board members and administration. Go Eagles.
Steve?
Yeah, so I have several. I have several topics to discuss. First, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that we just went into executive session out of order, and we did so in an effort to engage with members of this community and professionals who are providing sincere, honest feedback to this board in reference to items that we have on the agenda. My most sincere appreciation goes out to our constituents for providing their advocacy, feedback, and input. I value specifically those professionals that came in and gave us their insights as well. I think one thing that might be getting lost, or the one thing that I would want to underscore, is this is a safe community. This is a safe place. We are having conversations that are difficult to have relative to important policies and those types of things, but at the end of the day, our staff does a phenomenal job to ensure, and I mean our staff from those professionals that we hire in this seat and that seat, all the way through the entire system, does a phenomenal job, not just in making sure that we educate our students, but that this is a safe, welcoming, and warm environment. To that end, I also want to say thank you to our school psychs. As Mrs. Dorr shared, we received an update from Mr. Lynn Scott about this being an annual week in that space. Want to take a little bit of Miss Ernst's role right now and wish congratulations to all of the fall sports teams that have concluded their seasons. Wish best wishes to all of the winter teams that are starting up in their respective sports. But certainly, as Mrs. Ernst would have done, she would let everybody know who might be listening that the Big Walnut High School football team travels to Arlen Field in Mansfield tomorrow for the rematch from last year's regional final game against, well, I won't even mention them. Best wishes, of course, to Coach Page and his team. Also want to acknowledge the fact that tomorrow, 11/11, is Veterans Day. Big Walnut is a Purple Ribbon District. This means that the Purple Star Award that this district receives is recognition for all schools across this state that show a major commitment to students and their families connected to our nation's military. Personally, thank you to all the veterans residing in this district. Thank you to all the veterans who are parents of students in this district. And thank you to all those students who have gone on from Big Walnut High School and become service members themselves. I know that the high school had their veterans assemblies yesterday during their Eagle time. I believe that Big Walnut Middle School is having their Veterans Day breakfast tomorrow morning. And as the district is that Purple Star, I certainly want to speak appreciation, at least from a board seat, for all those with the status of veteran. Next, Ohio School Boards Association starts Sunday, the Capitol Conference. And just as we have sat here and discussed ideas over the last, 3 hours now, Gilligan's Island in a 3-hour tour. OSBA Sunday is Systems to Take Care of Young People. There's a session on. Also, there's a session on Board of Education Self-Assessment. Where do you stand as a board? Sunday at 2:30, there's Crisis Emergency Communication for school districts. Sunday at 3:30, there's Sidestepping Landmines, Legal and Practical Guidance for Implementing Board Policy. Monday at 9 a.m., there's 2022 Case Law. At 10:30, there's Planning for Growth. At 11:30, there's Facility Discussions for Safe and Warm Schools. At 2:30, there's Winning with Culture Without Giving In to Politics. At 3:30, there's Upcoming Policies. Tuesday at 9 o'clock, there's Legal Updates, where OSBA provides legislative updates that they anticipate in the year 2023. So many of the items that we are talking about happen to be taking place in our professional organization as Ohio School Board Association members. I will be attending sessions on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and certainly want to extend my warmest welcome to the rest of the board if they want to join me down there.
And I've got nothing. I think it's all been said. Moving on to item number 8. This is a meeting of the Board of Education public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not considered a public community meeting. This is a time for public participation during the meeting as indicated in the agenda. Please reference criteria for public participation, which is attached to the agenda. Darren, do we have anybody that wants to speak?
We have some folks that signed up prior to the meeting. The first individual, and these are the order in which they were turned into me, is Chelsea Skaggs regarding the district's weapon policy.
Hello, I am Chelsea Skaggs, and I'm the mother to a first grader at PRE. Our family is new to the district, though the area is not new to me as I graduated just down the road from Cinderberg High School and Mount Vernon Nazarene University. I understand and appreciate the intent behind introducing the policies in response to the real problem of school violence. Also, I want to recognize and thank the board members for the commitment that I saw some of you have to transparency, which per the mission of the board, I believe is a core value. Given that we are an educational institution, it seems vital to me that we make decisions that are backed by research and data. Today, I would like to offer research on the effects of increasing weapon presence in schools and some ideas of how to effectively decrease violence and death for students. While today I've heard you say that this may not be about guns, I want to reiterate the importance of how a policy is written and what poor language or acceptance of a poorly written policy could introduce to our district. A few key data points I ask you to consider as you continue these hard conversations. Access to a firearm, irrespective of age, triples the risk of death by suicide and doubles the risk of death by homicide. Guns accidentally take nearly 500 lives a year in the US from unintentional shootings, and these can happen to honest, well-intentioned people. That stat is from the CDC. A couple of incidents that actually have happened in the years that were mentioned earlier. There was a well-intentioned Pennsylvania teacher who left a loaded gun in the bathroom in 2016. There was a sheriff in Michigan who left a gun in the school locker room, and it was found by a 6th grader in 2018. And there was a school official right next door at Highland Schools who left a firearm unlocked. This was found by 2 first graders in 2019. I don't expect that my first grader would be able to tell the difference between a game with a toy weapon or a harmful weapon. The majority of the time, school violence is not random. It is planned, and there are many warning signs. I know those have already been discussed by a couple of the board members today, so I won't go over the importance again, but just reiterate that there are signs, there are mental health issues here, and there are surveys and programs that can be implemented as a first course of action. It's my hope that our community and board will make educated and united decisions in order to do what we are all tasked to do, which is to provide a safe and supportive environment for all of our children to learn, grow, and flourish. Thank you.
Linda Wagner, again, about a policy issue.
Hi, my name is Linda Wagner, and my husband and I are taxpayers in the Big Walnut School District. I'd like to take this opportunity, as Chelsea said, to acknowledge the work that's already been done into revising these school policies, a task that's often thankless and tedious, and also note that there is much, much more work that needs to be done. My remarks here argue against Board Policy 1617 that aims to permit weapon-carrying individuals other than law enforcement to be permitted in our schools. School violence, like any mass catastrophe, evokes an emotional response. As champions of children, our fears are stirred because of this violence, but we can't let this fear blindly drive our response. As the board oversees activities of institutions whose curricula are fact-based, their policy decisions must also be based in fact and be defensible. Quality research or experience supporting arming teachers as a solution to school violence are non-existent. Money that would be spent training teachers and ensuring the district against civil lawsuits would be better spent on programs that have evidence to support their effectiveness in preventing school violence, such as crisis assessment and prevention programs. Secondly, I have concerns about the following text in the policy, and I quote, "Individuals who are not hired to serve as special police officers or security guards or to serve in similar law enforcement or security positions may receive written authorization from the board to carry weapons onto school property if they meet the following requirements," unquote. And this has to be considered in light of the board's recent display of behavior with respect to the lateral transfer of an employee between school buildings, which was rejected by this board. This appears to be a decision that was not based on performance issues. Rather, it appears a personal vendetta against a person who is often in disagreement with this board. Is this how decisions regarding weapons will be made? Despite passing the requirements of this policy, this board could use the policy to arm only those they find favorable. This is particularly unnerving as it is not limited to teachers, but could be any employee or member of the public who is granted permission to carry on school grounds. I certainly do not want to grant this board that power. Please go back to the drawing board on this policy and do some real work to find defensible solutions to problem of school violence. The staff, the community, and most of all, the children deserve better from this board.
Next, we have Jennifer, I want to say Neesett. Okay.
After the last board meeting, I sent an email to the board, but only heard from 2 members, so I'm going to read parts of it along with some additional comments. I'm alarmed that the board is considering allowing our staff to have weapons in school. I'm worried about the safety of our students and our schools, and do not believe that allowing weapons, with the exception of the outstanding SROs that we currently have, increases safety. I've yet to see any evidence that this policy makes schools safer. Instead, I find statements from the police decrying this policy. Big Walnut has made some building and policy changes towards safety, and I think most families agree and appreciate these past efforts. This seems very different. Who is consulted with this proposed policy? Do teachers want this? Our resource officers, the Columbus Police, the safety committee? Even if you have no plans to allow people to be carrying any particular kind of weapon, this sets the stage for the boards down the line to approve a wide range of weapons to a wide range of people. You're not required to adopt any of these policies that Neola gives to you, as most Ohio districts have said they do not intend to arm teachers. I don't believe they are not adopting these policies because they aren't having tough conversations. As Chelsea said a few years ago, Highland schools did have a situation where a child was able to get their hands on a weapon, and while no one was injured and there were no bad intentions, something terrible could have happened. Mr. Fuji has spoken about community buy-in regarding a different matter at a different point this year. I believe this is really important, and I don't think that you have that at this point. I know I would like to see evidence that this improves safety, and I appreciate that you're setting up meetings with the community and with staff, but it almost feels like it's checking a box. I've heard some, because it was set up after this first reading. I know some people have said they think that this is going to pass regardless of any input you get. And that makes it really hard for people to carve time out of their busy schedules in order to come to any of these meetings. There are 3 people who ran for this board a year ago, running on this platform of transparency and open door policy and working with teachers, and this doesn't seem to be in line with that. At the last board meeting, there was a vote against a lateral job change for a current employee. I assume she interviewed for this job. She was placed on the agenda by the superintendent. The 3 no votes seem to show some bias. I believe that this will make Big Walnut employees fearful of retaliation if they express opposing views, which isn't an environment that's helpful or conducive to sending our district in the way that I think we all want it to go. We want it to be the very best that it can be. I also had heard that the daughter of a board member was up for that job and didn't get it. So I feel like abstaining would have shown less conflict. Thank you.
Next, we have Bill Shelby.
Good morning. I'm Bill Shelby, and my topic is school safety policy. I have 2 children that graduated from Big Walnut, and I have 2 grandchildren in the school system. I am opposed to having people armed with guns in schools who are not trained law enforcement officers. Gun safety is critical. Locking guns and ammunition in a separate, safe place is critical to gun safety. Arming staff is a tragedy waiting to happen. In 2019, the U.S. Secret Service performed an analysis of targeted school violence with the following findings. There is no profile of a student attacker, and there's no school that has been a typical profile. Attackers usually had multiple motives, the most common involving a grievance with classmates. Most attackers used firearms, and firearms were most often acquired from home. Most attackers had an experienced psychological, behavioral, or developmental symptoms. Half of the attackers had interest in violent topics. All of the attackers experienced social stressors involving their relationships with peers. Nearly every attacker experienced negative home life factors. Most attackers were victims of bullying. Most attackers had a history of school disciplinary actions, and many had prior contact with law enforcement. All attackers exhibited concerning behaviors, and most communicated their intent to attack. What seems to me to be the most important issue is to beef up our psychological and social services in schools rather than to debate their benefits. I applaud the discussion that has taken place today. Every meeting ought to have that type of discussion. You guys did a great job today. And the Ohio School Board Association is a great organization. I encourage you all to attend. Thank you.
Next, we have Kenneth, I'm going to say Gary.
That's correct.
Okay.
Good morning. I want to thank you, everyone here, for attending. This is my topic is school safety. I am a supporter of the Second Amendment. I went through the 737 hours of law enforcement. I was a law enforcement officer when I was younger, so I know what kind of training that it takes and what type of situations that people can get into. And I strongly encourage everyone here to think about 737 hours of training that's still, from situation to situation, is going to do nothing for you, to 24 hours of training. That is a mistake if anyone supports putting firearms in schools with less than 737 hours of training. If we want to hire law enforcement officers, I support that. We respect the law enforcement officers that I know you just met with. I have several friends that are in law enforcement. I've talked to 15 since this topic's come up. Not one support firearms in the school. It's going to confuse, if a situation were to come up, it would confuse the situation. It would make things more dangerous, not only for children, teachers, other adults, but for the law enforcement members who are responding themselves. And we want to talk about school safety, and we keep our schools safe. 4 times so far this year, my daughter's in 8th grade, I've went to pick her up. I've pressed the button, no question of who I am, what am I doing here, how can I help you? It's buzzed in right into the school. The same thing happened to my wife 2 weeks ago, and there was actually 2 people standing there. They decided to wait and let the door shut behind them and lock, and then buzz again. And then when asked about it, well, why didn't you guys just come in together? They said, hey, we thought that was how it was supposed to be. You check each person that comes in. And the response was, don't worry about it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a serious situation. This isn't an airline industry. This isn't a law enforcement industry. This is our children. I hope that everyone, parents and staff, do their due diligence and listen to the community and listen to the professionals. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Crowell, that concludes anyone that's registered to speak today.
Thank you. Item 9, scheduling of the next board meeting. The regularly scheduled meeting will be November 17, 2022, 6:30 p.m. Here. Item 10, or should I call this 11?
The next item.
Per 121.22, it is recommended the board enter executive session to discuss details relative to the security arrangements, emergency response protocols for the Board of Education. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Crowell,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorsch,
Yes.
Fuji,
Yes.
Mrs. Nix.
Yes.
Mrs. Graziosi.
Yes.
There's no intended actions after that executive session, is that
No.
correct?